How is it that they get away with that stuff? Right?
It's Massachusetts. It's basically a one-party state, and they basically just do everything the way they want to do it, and they justify it their own way. As a matter of fact, part of this whole procedure, they put in something that said they can break their own laws, break their own rules. They suspended rules both in the Senate and the legislature to push this through.
So how does something like that happen? And does it always require a group of people having to stand up and get so many petitions to combat it? Like, how does something?
Well, what happened is, as far as the petition is concerned, what happened was, the long story short, the legislature and Senate agreed behind closed doors. They wrote what became Chapter 135, Bill H.4885. They basically wrote that in the dark, behind closed doors. Three members of the Senate, 3 members of the legislature. They submitted the bill on a Wednesday night, I believe at like 6:30, and then they voted on it the next morning at like 11 a.m. Now tell me, how do you know what's in a 126-page bill enough with, no questions, no debate, nothing? They just said, the Speaker of the House said, I want this. The President of the Senate said, I want this. And the majority of both houses passed it. A week later, the governor signed it into law. Okay? Then getting to the petition portion of it, what happened was the citizens who were against this started a petition, a referendum, if you will, that would put the Chapter 135 on the ballot in 2026. Let the citizens decide. Okay? We needed about 36,000 certified signatures for that to happen. If we got 50,000 certified signatures, the law would be suspended until it was voted on by that referendum. Well, what happened was in October, it was plainly evident that both those numbers were achieved. Okay? So the legislature and the governor, in their own way of doing things, decided we can't let this happen. So the governor, with the flick of her pen, said, this law is an emergency. I'm signing an emergency preamble, and it went into law the next day. That's how they do things in Massachusetts. So it's still going to be on the ballot in 2026, but because of her actions, I guess the way I understand it is, once it's in law, it can't be suspended. So we ended up collecting, I believe it was like 93,000 certified signatures. So there's at least 93,000 residents who don't agree that this law is just. Okay? They asked the governor, okay, you signed it in July. It wasn't an emergency then. Why is it an emergency now? And basically, as I understand it, her reply was, well, we just looked at it. Okay, so it sat there for almost 3 months, and then they decided, and let's be real, they saw that it was going to be suspended, so they made it an emergency so it couldn't be suspended.
How much of an emergency could it have been if they were letting it sit there for 3 months?
Right. And that's the way the law works. Once she signed it, it takes 90 days for it to become law unless there's an emergency preamble. As I understand it, whenever it's an emergency preamble, it's the same time as the governor signs it. I believe this is a first, here almost 3 months later.
So can you explain to me a little bit about the law that they put in place and what it is that it's restricting when it comes to your rights to be able to get a firearm?
There's a lot to it.
Okay.
Let me explain a couple of other things that happened.
Sure.
Okay? Part of the law was going to require citizens who wanted their license to carry to go through way more education before they could apply, more than we've ever had to go through before. I believe it's even as much as police have to go through to be policemen, but whatever it is. Well, that was such that when the bill came out the next day, the Gun Owners Action League filed a lawsuit on that portion of the law, the educational requirements. The state police also said, we're not supporting this, at least as of now. They gave them no budget, no infrastructure. They just threw this all out. Here's what the citizens have to do. There were no teachers, instructors certified to teach what they required, so hence came this lawsuit. So then they said, well, okay, we'll suspend that for that piece of the law for 18 months. Okay? Then another piece that they did in the same fashion was, there's this nebulous term of assault weapons. Okay? And they've had this category that were illegal to have in Massachusetts because Massachusetts determined them as assault weapons. Well, what they did is they changed the definition of assault weapons to basically be any semi-automatic rifle. Okay? This goes back to, rifles that people have been using for 50, 100 years. They are now illegal in Massachusetts. If you didn't have it before August 1st, you can no longer obtain a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun in Massachusetts. Okay? In the same vein, Massachusetts has maintained these rosters of handguns that if it's not on the roster, a dealer cannot sell that gun to a Massachusetts citizen. And they go through it, the manufacturers have to go through all this testing and all this stuff to get their guns on the roster. Okay? And again, they called it the Massachusetts Approved Firearms Roster. The term firearms is very important, okay? Because firearms in Massachusetts were basically handguns, okay? Rifles were rifles and shotguns were shotguns. Well, they changed with this law, buried in the minutia, was the new definition of firearm. The new definition says handguns, rifles, and shotguns are now firearms, which means, according to the law, they have to be on the rosters before they can be sold to a citizen. Okay? Let me ask you, how many rifles and shotguns are on the rosters?
Probably none at this point.
None.
Yeah.
Absolutely none. Which also said nobody could basically buy a rifle or shotgun. That was brought to light, that they pulled that fast one, and they said, oh, okay, we won't enforce that now. Okay, so here's two major pieces of that law that are now being enforced even though it was an emergency. Okay, so they said if it's not their new assault style weapon, you can still buy your rifles and shotguns as you always did. Okay, but that now leaves it to, again, you still can't buy semi-automatic shotguns, which are the most popular. Shotguns or rifles. You can buy a bolt action or a lever action. That's it. Okay. So yeah, those are some of the fast ones that they pulled, for this emergency bill that now comes through. Another thing that they did, I told you they made semi-automatic rifles illegal, and shotguns for many, many years. And there's two categories of licenses: the LTC, which is the license to carry, and there's also what's called the FID card, Firearms ID, which is a limited, it basically limits the holder to some rifles, basically, and to buy ammunition. Okay? So a lot of people who only hunted would just get an FID card. They'd take their rifles and go hunting. Well, many of them shot with semi-automatic shotguns or semi-automatic rifles. Been happening for as long as there have been semi-automatic firearms. Okay? Well, they determined that if you only have an FID card, you can't hunt with you can't own a semi-automatic rifle. Okay? And not only can you not own it, it's a felony if you have one. So these people who've been doing this for how many years?
Generations.
They're now,
Yeah.
at the swipe of the governor's pen, are now felons. Okay? They also said that any youths, anybody under 18, cannot come hunting in Massachusetts. Okay? Many of these people bought their hunting license, for the season. And then the law says, no, you can't hunt there. But they won't refund their fees. They said, no, there's other ways. You can go hunt with a bow and arrow.
Right.
So, and it just goes on and on with all these different pieces of the law.